Tonight on MEC, we'll be talking about several events in the 70s, such as Vietnamization, President Carter's foreign policies, the Love Canal tragedy, detente, and fashion and music of the decade. Now here's San Jeezy with Vietnamization.
Earlier during the Vietnam War, Nixon had implemented the process known as Vietnamization, in which 540,000 troops were to be pulled out of Vietnam over an extended time period. In addition to this, the South Vietnamese were given responsibility of the war by American-provided money, weapons, training, and advice, as seen in this earlier footage of a training ground. This essentially put the war in the hands of the South Vietnamese, allowing the South Vietnamese soldiers to do more of the fighting, backed by continued American bombing. With this process of Vietnamization, Nixon found a way to disengage U.S. troops without appearing to abandon South Vietnam in a war against communism. However, it did not limit the war nor end the anti-war movement. This policy also fits into the broader policy of Nixon, in which the U.S. will no longer regard its fundamental strategy as containment, but rather as a cooperative world order.
Thanks, San Jeezy. And now here's Aaron with the Love Canal tragedy.
The Love Canal was meant to be a dream community planned by William T. Love. He wanted to dig a canal between the upper and lower Niagara rivers, but the idea was terminated due to the inability to transmit current over great distances. So the canal was turned into a chemical dump site. However, it wasn't sited and managed correctly, so it was covered and sold to the city. In the late 50s, about 100 homes and a school were built there. But then, on August 1978, the Love Canal exploded, and 82 different compounds, including 11 carcinogens, projected upward through the soil and later caused birth defects such as deafness, cleft palate, and slight retardation. A team was sent to detoxify the area, but they failed, and ever since it has been quarantined and isolated.
Thanks, Aaron. And now here's me with President Nixon and detente with the USSR. After President Nixon returned from China, he traveled to Moscow, making him the first U.S. president to travel to Moscow. There, they talked SALT, or Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, with the intentions of freezing each other's arsenal of intercontinental missiles, as seen in this earlier footage. This meeting proved to be a large step towards peace between the two superpowers that have been battling it out for the past few decades, and the start of a period of peace called détente, which is a French word for the easing of strained relations. This period's impact was rather large because the SALT talks continued, causing the threat of a nuclear war to reduce significantly. Thanks, me. And now here's San Jeezy with the fashion of the decade.
Fashion here in the 70s has begun with the continuation of the iconic hippie look from the 60s. Popular early fashions include tie-dye shirts, flared trousers, crop tops, bell-bottoms, and miniskirts. During the 70s, the hippie look almost completely disappeared. However, it had inspired a more casual look such as just t-shirts and jeans. And nearing the end of the 70s, we see a more relaxed look in which fashion is baggier. This new look accompanies a popular disco look that began to rise nearing the end of the 70s. Typically, bright colors are associated with the disco look. We also saw a rise of the punk rock style of clothing as punk rock began to be increasingly popular in the late 1970s. Overall for the 70s, fashion had embraced a clothing style in favor of freedom of expression as both men and women became increasingly bold and daring.
Thanks, San Jeezy. And now back to me with the music of the decade. There was a variety of music of the 70s, but most had the overall theme of feeling good, the most popular being disco, which people danced to in nightclubs.
I will survive. Oh, as long as I know how to love, I know I'll be alive. I've got all my life to live. I've got all my love.
This dance movement was a result of people looking for a source of happiness, rather than the darkness under the previous periods of fighting. While disco music was one of the most popular at the time, it wasn't the only one. Another genre of the 70s was progressive rock, a mix between rock and another genre, one of the most popular bands being Pink Floyd.
We don't need no education. We don't need no...
Thanks, me. And now here's Aaron with the last topic of the night, President Carter's foreign policies.
Jimmy Carter as president in 1976 brought a new emphasis based on Carter's personal ideology, which is the principle of self-determination for all people. He wanted to add this to the U.S. foreign policy. Carter believed the nation's foreign policy should reflect its highest moral principles, an example of this being the Camp David peace accords between Israel and Egypt, which paved the way for new progress in the Middle East, and to end long-running hostility between both sides. President Carter also signed a follow-on nuclear arms control known as SALT II with the Soviet leader at the time, Leonid Brezhnev, which dealt with the limitations and guidelines for nuclear weapons. This treaty, which never formally went into effect, proved to be one of the most controversial U.S.-Soviet agreements of the Cold War.
Ready? That wraps it up for MEC. Tune in tomorrow night for more exclusive looks at the latest news.